Is our last session in this Teacher PD series that we've developed around the science of reading. It's been like a really wonderful experience getting to know all of you guys and hearing what you're doing in your classroom and providing you with some information that hopefully will allow you to kind of reflect on your current practices and think about this new year just a little bit differently. We are really excited. We have some great things in store for you guys. We're going to share those at the end of our session today. But it has been just a wonderful experience having you guys join us this summer. And hopefully it's been a valuable experience for you too. Today we're going to do session 12, and our focus today will be on diagnostic assessment. When it comes to reading and when it comes to kind of a progression towards reading for students, we have to have a very clear sense of where they're at. And that is where assessment comes in. And there are many different varieties of assessment that we can utilize. And we're going to talk through those and why we might use some at certain points and why we might use others at certain points, and the role of all of these different types of assessment in our instructional practice. So hopefully you'll find this one valuable. And then at the end, we'll talk through what's coming next from the Literacy Division of the Louisiana Department of Education. For those of you guys who are new, and I don't know that we have anybody new, but if we do, I am Sarah Stolman, a K-2 Literacy PD Specialist here at the Louisiana Department of Education. You probably, if you've been to a lot of these sessions, you know that I was a kindergarten teacher and a first grade teacher. I worked as an instructional coach for grades K-2, and then I also served as an administrator at a K-2 school. So, I really have a love for the K-2 grade band, and it's just, it's something I really have a passion for, is talking about teaching kids how to read. And I've seen it, just across our grade band. If you have questions for me, you can always reach out to me at sarah.stolman@la.gov, or broaden the conversation by tweeting or using the hashtags Louisiana Literacy and Reading Revival on social media. You can get feedback from your colleagues and really connect and extend outside of just kind of the circle that you operate in every day. I think that's one of the most awesome things is just to really be able to connect with people who maybe are using a different curriculum, or maybe doing things just a little bit different, because it'll broaden your understanding of things too. So, the broader you can cast your net, I think the better for you as a leader, and then ultimately for you, for your students, because you'll be a much more informed educator. So, I do want to remind you guys of our Science of Reading Implementation office hours. These are for you. These are for our teachers. Leaders are welcome to join as well, but really these are designed for teachers. So don't feel intimidated or worried about popping in. This is for you. We have a link right here that you can link to. The password is literacy. But if you have questions just about setting your classroom up for the school year, or just what does a sound wall look like? I want to set up a sound wall in my classroom. What can I do? And I do want to let you guys know that we are currently developing sound wall cards and pictures that you guys will make available to you guys on our Louisiana Literacy Library. So you'll be able to access those if you want to set up that sound wall in your classroom. So we'll be, posting those real shortly. And so that'll be helpful. But we're here to help you, and we want to make this journey as easy for you as possible. Now, in our last session yesterday, we talked about small group instruction. We talked about how we plan for small group instruction, how we identify gaps in learning, and then how we develop targeted interventions and extensions to meet the needs of our students. Small group really fills in the gaps that emerge when after you've provided your kind of whole group core instruction. And remember, we talked about how effective small group instruction is responsive, meaning you're responding to the student needs as they emerge. It's inclusive, which means that all students might need small group instruction at one time or another. It's not just this group of students is always my small group student. Everybody might need a small group at one point or the other, but when you have that pulse on what's going on with their learning, you're going to know who needs that small group. And it's timely. We're not waiting 3 weeks to give small group instruction. We're doing it pretty soon after we've provided that core instruction so that we can fill in those gaps quickly so that those students are also ready to thrive in our core instruction. That makes your work much more efficient and much more impactful. And so you won't be kind of spinning your wheels trying to fill in large gaps because you nip them in the bud right as they happen. Now, today's objective is you guys are going to be able to explain how you can use diagnostic and formative assessment to drive your instruction. We're going to talk about some ideas for how you can measure your students' reading progress. And then we're going to share some tips for how you can use data to make impactful instructional decisions. So this is something that is just so important. I mean, it's foundational to teaching, is having a clear sense of, how you know what your students know. And we're going to talk about assessment in multiple ways today. And hopefully you'll feel that after this session, you'll understand what types of assessments are out there for measuring the student's reading proficiency and what you can do with the information that you gather from those assessments. So we'll move on right now, but just going to give you guys an overview of assessing reading. But an essential part of high quality reading instruction is having a clear sense for where your students are at in their progression towards proficient reading, right? So, I mean, when we think about kind of what our expectations are for a kindergartner, are going to be a lot different than what our expectations are for a second grader. And a good assessment is going to really kind of give you information relative to their stage and their reading journey. So you're going to know where they're at in their progression to proficient reading. And are they where they need to be in order to successfully or to remain on track to proficient reading? We have many different tools that we can and should use to measure students' reading. And you guys are probably familiar with a lot of these, but we kind of start off with universal screeners. We're going to talk a little bit about what a universal screener is. And you guys are probably very familiar with these, but these are just really quick assessments that identify students who are at risk for not reading proficiently. We have diagnostic assessments. Diagnostic assessments are going to give us a lot of information on which skills in particular students are struggling with, or which aspects of the code a student is struggling with. We're going to talk about what those look like too. We have curriculum-based formative and summative assessments. Most of us now are using a tier 1 curriculum, and the vast majority of our tier 1 curricula do have formative and summative assessments embedded in them. And coupled with those formative and summative assessments are resources that you can use when students are not making the necessary or adequate progress. And then sometimes we might get in a situation where we do have to create our own formative and summative assessments. And that's okay too. Sometimes you might just want a little more information and you're like, okay, I really want to know this. I don't see this resource in my curriculum. I'm going to create it on my own. And that's okay too. Now, the assessments that we use in terms of reading really should measure the skills that are identified as central to proficient reading. So when we think about those skills that the National Reading Panel identified as being crucial for proficient reading, we're talking about phonemic awareness, especially in those earliest grades, phonics, reading fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And we can easily see how these skills are directly tied to what we've been talking about throughout this whole series, which is Scarborough's reading rope and the different components associated with Scarborough's reading rope, where phonemics, phonics, and fluency. Phonemics, phonics, and fluency are part of our word recognition strands. And then we have vocabulary and comprehension that are part of our language comprehension strands. So we see all of those things, but reflected in these central factors. And our assessment should reflect these as well, if we're going to have a clear picture of where our students are at. Now, when it comes to universal screeners, you guys are probably very familiar with these. The vast majority of our systems across the state do use a universal screener. Now, we all might use different screeners. Some of the commonly used screeners that you might be familiar with are Dibbles, the 8th edition, Acadience. Some of us use STEEP or STEP, and I think we do have some schools maybe use AimsWeb. You know, what universal screeners are these are tools that are used to identify students who are at risk for experiencing reading difficulties, okay? They're very quick, brief assessments that are administered to all students, and they focus on targeted skills and are predictive of future reading outcomes. So in kindergarten and the beginning of first grade, we're really looking at phonemic awareness, basic phonics, alphabetic principle, things like that. But then as we move through first grade and in the second and third grade, we're looking at reading fluency. And then in third grade, sometimes we're starting to really measure comprehension through these screeners as well, through activities like maybe you've heard of like a maze screener or something like that, where the students read a passage, but they fill in the missing words. You know, that's proven to be a very good measure of reading comprehension. These are very predictive of future reading outcomes. So when we administer these assessments, we're usually given, you know, a report that indicates are the students reading at benchmark or above benchmark? Are they below benchmark or are they well below benchmark? And right away, we can start targeting students who, you know, really have an indication that they might struggle to read proficiently by zeroing in on those kids who are identified as having some risk for not reading proficiently. These screeners, you know, they're typically administered 3 times a year, usually at the beginning of the year and then at the middle and end of the year. Sometimes you might only administer them at the beginning of the year. And if you're in a district or a school where you only administer it at the beginning of the year, a lot of these resources are readily available for you online. I might encourage you just to kind of with your own class, administer some of these yourselves at the midpoint and the end of the year if you don't get that information, because it's going to give you a good indication of, you know, is this student still demonstrating risk for not reading proficiently, or are they really on track to do well? Like I mentioned before, some of these commonly used screeners are Dibbles 8th edition. Acadience is a very common one, STEEP, STEP, and you know, recently legislation was passed, Act 438. And so beginning not this school year, but the next school year, we are going to have a universal screener across the state that we're using. And that will be great because it'll give us a real opportunity to see how our students across Louisiana are doing and have a great picture of where they are in their progression towards reading proficiency. So we're really excited about that. It's just a, you know, such a wonderful example of how, you know, Dr. Brumley and our Bessie board and our legislators are really supporting literacy, especially early literacy. It's a really exciting time to work with early literacy because we're doing some really great things. Now, like I said, the universal screeners are really a great way to identify children who are at risk for reading difficulties. You're going to get that report that says, are they at benchmark, below benchmark? And one thing to really recognize is that universal screeners are not directly aligned to our curricula. You know, I've heard it said that they're kind of curriculum agnostic. Doesn't matter what curriculum you use. These are going to give you a measure of where our students are at in terms of their likelihood of struggling with reading in the future. But it can identify, these screeners can identify the extent to which a student is thriving in their core curriculum, right? So if I have, you know, 25 students in my class, you know, and 20 of them are at benchmark or above benchmark, but I have 5 who, you know, are maybe below benchmark or well below benchmark. Those 5, I know right away, maybe are struggling to thrive in our core curriculum. You know, if I'm analyzing the results from my beginning of the year screeners and I get that, I might look to see, is this a student who maybe came from another district? Is this a student who was demonstrating the reading issues like last year? I might go talk to their teacher. You're going to get this report really, usually it should be administered within the first 30 days of school. And so you're going to get this report pretty quickly. And it's such a great opportunity for you to kind of dig in and see, okay, let me get the story on this kid so that I can provide them with the support that they need. And this information can be used to kind of fill those or form those early intervention groups. Some of you guys might have interventionists who support your class. If I have kids who are ending up as, being high risk for reading struggles based on these screeners, and I have some say in which kids are going to these intervention groups, those are the kids I'm going to target right there. I might have some kids who are in the green and may struggle with some of the content I present in my curriculum. I might support that in my small groups, but when I'm thinking about kind of a larger intervention program, I'm really looking at the results of these screeners, and that's how I'm making those decisions. A kid who performs well on these screeners, but maybe struggles a bit with some of the content that you produce, that's really just a kid you can support in your small group. But these kids who are not at benchmark based on these screeners, those are kids that you're really going to want to target, and they might need something a little more intensive than what you can provide in your small group, if that's available to you. If it's not, you know that you're going to want to provide them support. Now, careful analysis of these results can kind of really give you a window into their reading, right? And it can help drive your instructional efforts. This is a resource that you can use when you get those results back. I pulled this from the Acadience website, and I would encourage you guys to check out the Acadience website if that's the screener that you're using right now, because there are a wealth of resources there that are open source, so you can access them for free. They're all there, but this was a tool that I used to use with my students. And so when I get that report from Acadience, I kind of sort my kids into these groups. So I have my, that group that really was just like, they struggled in both areas, in phonemic awareness and alphabetic principle and basic phonics. And those kids who really need core support, those kids who don't need anything, who didn't struggle, are going to go in that group one, right? Those are those kids who are right where they need to be. They're not struggling in any of those areas. They're going to be just kids who I'm monitoring through my formative assessments, but they really just, I can feel pretty comfortable that they're going to thrive in the core, but I'm still monitoring through my formative assessments. Then I get to my group 2, and these are kids who might need a little bit of additional support based on or just focused on the alphabetic principle and basic phonics skills. Okay, so when I look at like how they performed on their nonsense word fluency, and how many correct letter sounds and whole words they could read, these are kids who just need a little support there. They might need a little tweak with the code. I might want to do a phonics inventory or something like that, or analyze the results of this nonsense word assessment to see like if there are particular aspects of the code that they're struggling with. But those kids are going to be a group. Then I have group 3 here, and these are kids who are struggling with their phonemic awareness, right? So they're doing well with the basic phonics and the alphabetic principle, but they're really, they just need some support with phonemic awareness. And then group 4 is the kids who are struggling with both. Okay, so these are kids who need help in all areas. And these are the ones that are typically going to be your significantly below benchmark or your well below benchmark students. But this is a great way to kind of group your students right there at the beginning of the year. It gives you a good window into kind of what's going on in your class. And really kind of gets you attuned to their learning behaviors and what they know and can do. And it'll make your work as a teacher so much more efficient, because you're going to know exactly where you need to kind of focus and target. You're not going to spin your wheels doing things that don't need to be done, because you have all of the information you need to really target those areas that need some support. And this is just a first grade sorting sheet. They have them for K, they have them for, goes up to sixth grade. So they have all of those available for you. But definitely access that website if you use Acadience, because there are just so many wonderful resources on there for you to support you as a teacher. Now, we talked about universal screeners, and we almost, all of us do administer at least a beginning of the year universal screener. And you can do it up to 3 times a year. But in addition to universal screeners, you're going to have what we call diagnostic assessments. Okay. Now, you can administer diagnostic assessments usually at the beginning of the year, but also throughout the year as needed. And this is where you're really going to identify specific gaps in learning or understanding. Okay. So if I go back to that worksheet I showed you guys on the last slide, and I know, okay, like I have this group of kids who's really struggling with the alphabetic principle and basic phonics, right? And I analyzed the results of that nonsense words fluency assessment, and I really couldn't pick up so many patterns for whatever reason. This is where I might do some sort of diagnostic assessment that would allow me to kind of zero in on what aspects of the code they're struggling with, right? The same goes with that phonemic awareness. I might kind of zero in on where they're struggling with phonemic awareness using this kind of diagnostic assessment. Do they struggle to rhyme? Do they struggle with phoneme segmentation or phoneme deletion? Things like that. And this is going to give me really specific targeted information that allows me to really target my supports. So I have them grouped. Now I'm going to dig in a little bit deeper. These can be kind of time consuming when you start thinking about like phonics inventories and things like that. So if you've done that worksheet, like I talked about before, it doesn't have to be that worksheet, but if you kind of analyze the results of your screener, you might say, okay, those kids who were, kind of likely just to need core support, they were thriving in the core, the kids who are at benchmark, I'm going to kind of leave them alone a little bit, but then I'm going to really administer these phonics inventories or these phonemic awareness inventories to the kids who struggled in these areas to really get that. It'll save you some time and it'll make your work much more strategic and intentional. So think about that. Keep that in mind too. And most of the curricula that you guys are using do have diagnostic components. So, I think about, I know a lot of you guys might use core knowledge, like the foundational skills program, the skills strand. Like I know in that, like at the beginning of the year in that first unit, they administer a lot of diagnostic benchmarks that are going to give you a lot of good, clear information about, what skills were mastered in the previous grade level, where you might need to support based on what they know there. So these are really great. Now, a lot of times, we always get like new students throughout the year. You might have kids kind of coming back from being virtual for a while or something like that. If you don't have the opportunity to have that screener information, a diagnostic assessment is going to be your best friend for those students. Don't wait too long. You get this new student and he's from another district and you really don't have any information on what he knows and what he doesn't know. Pull out some of those diagnostic assessments from the beginning of the year and give those to that student, because that's going to give you a real clear sense of where they're at in their learning. And use those because it really will make your efforts much more targeted. Some examples of diagnostic assessments that you might use, error analysis of literacy progress monitoring data. If you're doing a screener that has progress monitoring resources, you're going to analyze like what they're doing there, right? I know Acadience has progress monitoring resources that you can use between screenings, and you can analyze kind of where the breakdown is there. Like I said, a phonics inventory is a great resource, where you can kind of really see what aspects of the code are they struggling with and what can I target. And that's not hard to support if you're noticing that, okay, they're really just struggling with vowel control or vowel consonant E words or magic E words, we might call them. I'm just going to do a quick little review with them and hopefully that'll be enough support to kind of really move the needle a little bit with them. I've talked to you guys about my love of running records or reading records. You get information on everything there once the students are able to read such that you can do that sort of running record. But that's going to give you information on what they know about the code, their ability to decode with automaticity, any issues with prosody, which is like reading with expression, issues with rate, issues with accuracy. That's my gold standard in terms of a diagnostic assessment. If that's the only thing you can do, that's a good one, especially from about middle of first grade on, because that's just going to give you so much information. If you have a particular intervention that you're using, or you might have intervention or curricula specific diagnostic tools like the ones I was telling you guys about before. Analysis of student work. So you're carefully looking at like their classroom assignments, their work samples, tests, things like that. You can use all of these things to diagnose their learning. Observation and anecdotal notes. You know, I was a kindergarten teacher for a long time, and sometimes that is the best way to get the information that you need. You know, might be that, you know, we're doing a rhyming activity, whole group, and I'm strategically calling on these kids because my screeners indicated that they struggle with phonemic awareness, right? So I have my eyes like kind of ready to hit these 5 kids that were well below benchmark on as it relates to phonemic awareness on my screener. And all I'm doing is making notes on what they're doing. If I say cat and he says dog, and I'm asking him to produce a rhyming word, like, I don't know necessarily that he can't rhyme, that he doesn't understand the question, right? Or he's thinking I'm asking for an opposite, who knows? But I'm making notes about that, observation and anecdotal notes. And sometimes that's the best information you can get. And another thing that you really might want to do, and this might be something really to think about, because I know you guys are, you know, starting off your year now, and you might have beginning of the year conferences or meetups with parents. Just a quick little student or family interview. Ask the parents questions about the child's reading behaviors. Do they like to read? Do they read independently at home? What are some things that the parents notice about the reading? Any concerns that the parents might have about their child's reading? What a great way to kind of form that connection just from the get-go and get insight from somebody who you know, has seen this child since birth and knows more than anybody, you know, what their reading behaviors are like at home. So you can do that and ask your students, you know, what do you like to read? Is there anything you want me to know about you as a reader? Things like that. These are great ways to get information. Now you're going to want to do your own inventories and assessments as well, but it's just another way to get a good pulse on really what's going on in your class. Now, the last few things that we're going to talk about are formative assessments. So we talked about this a lot yesterday when we talked about small groups. And formative assessments are very powerful. And these are things that should be done really daily. You're going to regularly assess your student progress using regular formative assessment. Now, if you're using a high quality curriculum, formative assessments are often embedded in lessons. But the work comes in analyzing them. You know, it shouldn't just be like, okay, they completed page 2 in the workbook, tear it out, guys, and put it in your folder and take it home. No, they need to turn that into you, and you need to analyze it. In my class, like when I was a teacher, one of the things that I would do is I always had my clipboard, like I always felt it was permanently attached to my arm, but you know, I'd be walking around watching them complete those worksheets and providing that in the moment response, right? Sometimes that would prevent me from even needing to pull that student for a small group, right? But I'd be making notes about what they were doing. You know, when I was a kindergarten teacher, that I noticed BB reversals or PQ reversals, writing that down. But if you're not analyzing and collecting information and making instructional decisions because of that or using that information, it's really a wasted opportunity. So you want to use those formative assessments because they are powerful in helping you to make instructional decisions that are going to mitigate gaps in learning. right? You're going to be able to quickly pounce on any issue so that they don't just kind of widen. And then you've gotten to the end of the quarter, to the end of the semester, or worse, to the end of the year, and kind of feel like, ooh, okay, this kid is nowhere near where he needs to be, if you are really good with your data collection, nothing is going to come as a surprise when you get to these screening points, right? You're going to immediately be able to know who's probably going to come up in the red or yellow. It should all correspond. And sometimes there's some weird outliers, or kids might have a bad day when they're testing or something like that, surely, but really, you should be able to predict that. And honestly, that's a wonderful thing for you guys to do, is before you even get your results for screeners and things like that, kind of predict where you think your students are going to end up. And then when you get that report, check yourself. And that'll give you an indication on how attuned you are to what's going on in your classroom. It's a wonderful thing to do. And really plan time to analyze the results of these assessments. Once you get that into your system, your daily system, you're going to see it doesn't take a lot of time, but it has to be a part of your daily practice. I would stay after school a little bit every day, just to kind of like score my exit tickets or analyze my assessments, and then kind of quickly sort and make gaps and have plans for what I'm going to do. But I was very, very quick and intentional. And I wasn't staying after school for 3 hours. Nobody wants you guys doing that. I want you guys to give them your families or whatever you want to, really whatever you want to do. But I also want you to recognize the value and importance in this, because you're not going to, it's a little work now, but you're not going to be playing catch up when those gaps get much wider. So do definitely keep that in mind. Now, again, just like we were saying yesterday, the formative assessments are tied to lesson objectives. So where screeners are addressing these broad skills as our diagnostic assessments, your formative assessments are really tied to your lesson objectives for the day. And your lesson objectives should be aligned with the skills that are needed for proficient reading or writing, as the case may be. So, it all kind of goes hand in hand. Like the universal screener gives you a big overview. The diagnostic assessments gives you specifics on where they're kind of breaking down in their path to reading proficiency. But the formative assessment gives you that day-to-day information that you need, such that when you get to the diagnostics or the screeners, like I said, you're going to be able to predict exactly where they are. Now, my final thoughts today are, assessment is such a key part of providing science of reading aligned reading instruction. We've talked a lot about Scarborough's reading rope. We've talked about these key factors that kind of shape this science of reading approach to reading instruction. But we have to know where they're at along all of these indicators or threads of the rope. We have to be able to assess that and paint this picture of our students and where they're at in their progression to proficient reading. A variety of assessments, including those universal screeners, the diagnostics, those daily formatives, and really your end of unit summatives, can give you that information. You're telling a data story, and that used to be what I would talk with my teachers about, right? You're telling a data story of this student and where they're at in their journey to proficient reading. And all of these things together are going to help you tell a very vivid, clear story and ensure that your students are on track to read. So that's super exciting. Now, our engaged question today is, how do you currently assess your students' reading? And what will you do differently this year to assess them in a way that supports the science of reading? Go ahead and email me your responses to that. I love reading those responses. I try to get back to you guys with your responses, but really they make me think too. And it's exciting to hear what you guys are doing across our great state. I did tell you guys that I was going to reveal some exciting things that we have coming up for you guys. So, this is the last session in this series focused on the science of reading, but we are going to start soon. And